Imagine waking up one day to the unsettling certainty that every face you pass hides a story of silent torment, a flicker of suppressed desire, a shadow lurking just beneath the surface. You look into the mirror, expecting to see yourself, but instead, you see a stranger whose intentions you cannot fully trust, not even your own. There is a darkness inside you, a latent chaos waiting, patient and cunning, capable of reshaping your thoughts and actions when you least expect it. You wonder, how much of what you believe to be morality, love, or reason is real, and how much is a fragile veil over something far more sinister? Fyodor Dostoyevsky, writing in the cold, suffocating streets of 19th-century St. Petersburg, dared to stare at this abyss. He revealed not the heroic or the saintly, but the fractured, trembling core of humanity, where guilt, envy, and desire intertwine with the noblest of intentions. Consider Raskolnikov, whose mind teeters on the knife's edge of murder and morality, yet is chained to a conscience that refuses to break. Or the underground man, trapped in the labyrinth of his own contradictions, mocking the very society that confines him, yet incapable of freeing himself from its psychological shackles. Dostoyevsky whispers a terrifying possibility. The darkness within us is not an anomaly, it is the essence of being human. Why do we so easily deceive ourselves? Why do we wear masks, pretending civility, kindness, or rationality, when beneath them lies a tempest of impulses we cannot fully control? And yet, we live under the illusion that we are exceptions, that the swirling chaos of human nature exists out there, somewhere beyond our own reflection. What if it is already here, nested deep in our instincts, our memories, our fleeting thoughts? Every act of kindness might be tinged with selfish desire, every moral victory, a subtle compromise. Can you truly trust your own heart when it is at war with itself? Picture a society meticulously structured on law, reason, and ethics, yet quietly addicted to the shadow games of human cruelty, gossip, betrayal, manipulation. The quiet cruelty of daily life, passive aggression, envy, the silent hunger for revenge, reminds us that evil need not roar to exist. It whispers. It insinuates. It seeps into the corners of the soul that we deny even exist. Dostoyevsky's genius was to show that this darkness is not always dramatic or overt. It is banal, woven into the fabric of existence, as ordinary as a cup of tea, as routine as a walk through familiar streets. And therein lies the chilling truth. The abyss does not lie in others. It lies in the human condition itself, in the marrow of your own consciousness. Consider this. Could the horrors you read about, the betrayals, the violence, the unexplainable acts of cruelty, be nothing more than mirrors reflecting what you refuse to acknowledge in yourself? Could the thoughts you suppress, the selfish impulses you ignore, the unspoken desires you pretend not to have, be the same currents that have driven men to madness, murder, and despair throughout history? Dostoyevsky invites us to ask the questions we fear, to confront the paradox that to understand the light, one must first understand the shadow. He does not offer comfort, he offers confrontation, a relentless gaze into the truth we seldom dare to recognize. The human soul is a battlefield, and the enemy within is always awake. And now, standing on the threshold of self-recognition, you feel it, the heavy pull of inevitability. Will you look away, content to remain in ignorance, to pretend that the abyss exists only in the headlines, in the stories of others? Or will you descend, even for a moment, into the uncharted darkness within, to face the questions that have no easy answers? Who am I when stripped of pretense? What impulses govern my morality? And if humanity is capable of such contradictions, where does that leave hope, love, and the promise of redemption? The darkness is patient, and it is universal. And yet, as you stand at the edge, peering into its depths, a strange exhilaration rises. Perhaps to confront the shadow is not merely to acknowledge despair, but to awaken the possibility of seeing the human soul in all its terrifying, magnificent truth. But to do so, you must take the first step. You must recognize that what lies beneath is not a myth, not a cautionary tale. It is you. The question remains, urgent and inescapable. If the darkness is inside us all, then what, if anything, can save us? The darkness within humanity does not arise from whimsy or sudden acts of malice. It is cultivated, nurtured by layers of consciousness, societal constructs, and the quiet, relentless machinery of the mind. Dostoyevsky's insight was profound because he recognized that evil, true, penetrating evil, is not always external. It grows in the hidden recesses of our psyche, a consequence of unresolved desires, guilt, and the contradictions that define human existence. He understood, as Nietzsche would later insist, that man is not merely good or evil, but a complex terrain where light and shadow are inseparable, constantly struggling for dominance. Carl Jung might describe this as the shadow self, the parts of our personality that we reject, deny, or refuse to acknowledge. Jung taught that the shadow is inevitable. It is a repository of instincts, forbidden impulses, and unacknowledged fears. Most individuals, attempting to maintain the facade of virtue or normalcy, suppress this shadow, consigning it to the unconscious. But suppression is not eradication. The shadow does not disappear. It waits. It grows stronger, influencing behavior subtly, through impulses, dreams, irrational fears, and moral compromises. In Dostoyevsky's novels, the shadow is not an abstraction. Raskolnikov's fevered justifications, his oscillation between pride and guilt, reflect the perpetual tension between the conscious desire to be virtuous and the unconscious thirst for dominance, control, and self-gratification. Society amplifies this internal struggle. From early childhood, humans are conditioned to obey, conform, and repress impulses deemed unacceptable. We are taught to value appearance over authenticity, compliance over self-reflection, and collective morality over individual truth. Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialist perspective illuminates this. Man is condemned to be free, yet he fears freedom, for with freedom comes responsibility, and with responsibility comes the terrifying prospect of confronting his own desires and choices. To avoid this confrontation, we adopt masks, perform roles, and participate in rituals of normalcy, all while a silent storm rages beneath. It is here, in the interplay of freedom and fear, that the hidden problem festers. But this darkness is not only psychological, it is philosophical. Schopenhauer suggested that human suffering stems from desire itself, the endless striving that never finds satisfaction. Every wish, every ambition, carries within it the seed of frustration and disillusionment. We chase ideals of goodness, success, and love, yet our deepest instincts often betray those ideals. Dostoyevsky saw this paradox as intrinsic to human existence. To strive for morality is noble, but the striving itself reveals the depth of our internal contradictions. Every act of supposed virtue is shadowed by selfish motives. Every denial of base desire is also a recognition of its presence. The human soul, then, is caught in perpetual tension, between what it is and what it aspires to be, between instinct and reason, between freedom and fear. Viktor Frankl adds another layer of insight. In the darkness, he saw the profound yearning for meaning as the antidote to despair, yet meaning is never granted passively. It must be discovered, wrested from life's contradictions, often in defiance of suffering and moral ambiguity. When individuals fail to confront the shadow or seek meaning, they become susceptible to internalized cruelty, self-deception, and a quiet resignation to the chaos within. The hidden problem is thus both the darkness itself and our failure to recognize, confront, and integrate it into conscious understanding. Dostoyevsky also illustrates the societal dimension of this problem. His characters are never isolated. They are enmeshed in social systems, cultural pressures, and historical contexts that exacerbate inner turmoil. Poverty, hypocrisy, rigid moral codes, and the constant gaze of judgment act as mirrors reflecting both the fear and the desire within the individual. The underground man's cynicism is not born of mere malice. It is a defensive response to society's demands, a philosophical revolt against the absurdity of external constraints imposed on the complexity of the human mind. In this way, the hidden problem is doubled. It exists within the individual and is amplified by society, creating a feedback loop of guilt, repression, and unacknowledged impulses. What makes this problem so insidious is its invisibility. Unlike external threats, it cannot be easily measured, legislated against, or even openly acknowledged. It is a subtle erosion of integrity, the quiet manipulation of one's own moral compass, the moments when conscience is negotiated for convenience or desire. It shapes identity, dictating choices in ways the conscious mind scarcely perceives. Every compromise, every act of self-deception, every unexamined thought becomes a conduit through which the shadow asserts influence. The darkness is patient, enduring across generations, embedded not only in individuals but in the structures of culture, religion, and ideology. And yet, this recognition is not meant to condemn. The darkness within humanity does not announce itself with fanfare. It does not roar. It seeps quietly into the cracks of daily life, shaping decisions, twisting intentions, and dictating outcomes in ways that most people never perceive. You may convince yourself that your actions are guided by reason, morality, or compassion, but beneath the surface, subtle forces are at work. Cognitive biases, instinctual drives, and cultural conditioning conspire to steer behavior in ways that often contradict conscious values. The unseen consequences of the shadow are insidious because they are invisible, woven into the fabric of what we call normal life, and rarely acknowledged until their effects become undeniable. Consider, for instance, the human tendency toward self-deception. Psychologists describe this as the mind's effort to maintain a coherent sense of self, even when confronted with uncomfortable truths. Confirmation bias leads us to seek evidence that validates our beliefs, while ignoring evidence that challenges them. Moral licensing allows us to commit small transgressions after performing an ostensibly virtuous act, convincing ourselves that our morality is intact. These mechanisms, though seemingly innocuous, are conduits for the shadow, allowing the darker currents of desire, envy, or cruelty to infiltrate daily life without ever appearing as overt evil. Dostoyevsky understood this well. Human beings are capable of rationalizing the most horrific acts under the guise of necessity, duty, or principle, all while retaining a self-image of decency. The societal consequences are equally profound. When individuals harbor unacknowledged darkness, it manifests in collective behavior, subtle, systemic, and often devastating. Cultural conditioning teaches conformity, suppressing authentic expression and fostering resentment, envy, and passive aggression. Institutions, too, reflect these patterns. Bureaucracies, political systems, and social hierarchies often codify the hidden desires of individuals, translating them into structures that perpetuate inequity, injustice, and moral compromise. History is filled with examples of ordinary people committing extraordinary cruelty, not because they are monsters, but because they are influenced by unseen psychological forces and cultural pressures that normalize or obscure evil. From the quiet complicity of citizens in oppressive regimes to the invisible acts of exclusion and marginalization that shape societies, the shadow exerts its influence silently but relentlessly. Neurological science provides further insight into these consequences. The human brain is not a purely rational instrument. It is a complex network of instincts, emotions, and learned behaviors. Mirror neurons, for example, make us susceptible to imitation, empathy, and social conformity, but they also render us vulnerable to mimicry of cruelty, indifference, or manipulation. The amygdala, responsible for processing fear and threat, can override rational thought, causing reactions that are defensive, aggressive, or irrational. Dopamine-driven reward circuits reinforce behaviors that satisfy desires in the short term, even when they conflict with long-term ethical reasoning. These neural realities reveal that the shadow is not merely metaphorical. It is physiological, embedded in the architecture of thought and emotion, subtly shaping perceptions, judgments, and moral choices. At a personal level, the unseen consequences are equally devastating. The suppression of the shadow generates anxiety, guilt, and inner conflict, often manifesting as depression, self-sabotage, or chronic dissatisfaction. Relationships suffer because unacknowledged impulses distort communication, breed mistrust, and erode intimacy. Careers falter when ambition is tainted by envy, fear, or moral compromise. Even creativity and joy are shadowed when individuals cannot reconcile the duality of their nature. The tension between the conscious ideal and the unconscious drive becomes a constant, invisible tug-of-war, leaving people exhausted, alienated, and often unaware of the true source of their discontent. Dostoyevsky's works repeatedly illustrate these dynamics. In Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov's theoretical justifications for murder cannot shield him from the moral consequences that haunt him relentlessly. In The Brothers Karamazov, the conflict between faith, doubt, and desire tears families and communities apart, showing how personal shadows ripple outward into social catastrophe. The novels are meticulous studies in cause and effect. One suppressed impulse, one moral compromise, one unacknowledged desire, can cascade through consciousness and society, producing consequences far beyond the initial act. It is a reminder that the shadow is never contained. It is a force that expands, shapes, and defines both individual lives and collective histories. And yet, there is a cruel elegance in this reality. The very mechanisms that create moral blindness also provide the potential for awareness. The mind's capacity for reflection, reason, and self-examination means that these unseen consequences are not immutable. By observing patterns in behavior, tracing the origin of impulses, and acknowledging the shadow, individuals can illuminate the dark corridors of the psyche. The risk is that most never do. Most live their lives in partial awareness, skimming the surface, believing that good intentions are sufficient armor against the subtle, persistent influence of the darkness. This ignorance allows the shadow to thrive, quietly shaping the course of humanity. The emotional weight of this recognition is profound. You may begin to see your own life, your choices, and your relationships through this lens. The petty resentments, the compulsions, the rationalizations, the quiet betrayals of conscience, all of them threads in a web spun by forces you seldom notice. The world is both familiar and alien, populated by people whose actions are guided not only by morality but by shadow, whose intentions are filtered through layers of fear, desire, and societal conditioning. The unseen consequences are everywhere, shaping destinies while remaining invisible, like currents beneath a calm sea, moving with relentless precision toward outcomes no one fully anticipates. And now, standing in the middle of this revelation, you feel the weight of urgency. To ignore it is to remain entangled in a world dictated by forces beyond conscious control. To confront it is to begin a journey that may redefine every aspect of perception, morality, and freedom. But the path forward is neither easy nor comfortable. It requires a radical shift, a rebellion against the assumptions you have lived by. It demands that you see not only the darkness in humanity, but the potential for transformation that arises when the shadow is faced directly. Imagine standing at the edge of a chasm, the darkness of human nature stretching beneath you, familiar yet terrifying. You have seen its subtle influence, its quiet manipulation of thought, action, and desire. The question now is not merely to understand the shadow, but to act, to rebel against it. This is the moment Dostoyevsky calls the point of self-confrontation, the turning of the mind toward awareness and conscious defiance. The rebellion does not arrive with a sword or a manifesto. It begins with a refusal to surrender, a willingness to face the chaos within without flinching, and an insistence on forging a life guided not by unconscious forces, but by intentional reflection. The first step in this rebellion is radical self-honesty. To confront the shadow, you must acknowledge it in all its complexity. Jung insisted that what is not faced manifests in life as fate. Every denial, every rationalization, every suppressed desire is a seed that grows into unseen consequences. Raskolnikov's torment is not the result of a single crime. It is the culmination of years of self-deception, pride, and unresolved intellectual arrogance. By confronting the truth of your impulses, your contradictions, and your fears, you begin to reclaim agency. This act of self-honesty is a rebellion against the unconscious script that has quietly dictated your actions, a refusal to remain passive in the face of your own inner forces. Historical examples reveal that rebellion often begins with discomfort, with the recognition that conventional morality or societal norms may be insufficient guides. Consider Dostoyevsky himself, whose time in a Siberian labor camp exposed him to the extremes of human suffering and resilience. He observed firsthand that even in conditions designed to strip individuals of autonomy, the mind retains a measure of freedom, the freedom to interpret, to reflect, to choose how to respond to suffering. This insight is crucial. Liberation is not found in external conditions alone, but in the conscious use of the mind to navigate internal and external realities. The rebellion is inward as much as it is outward. Philosophically, this rebellion draws on existentialist thought. Sartre wrote that man is condemned to be free, burdened with the responsibility of choice in a world without predetermined meaning. To accept this freedom is to embrace the weight of the shadow and the moral complexity of existence. It is not a comfortable act. It is a confrontation with uncertainty, the recognition that there are no guarantees, no absolutes, and no external authority to shield you from the consequences of your choices. The rebellion demands courage, the courage to act ethically not because society demands it, but because you have examined your shadow and chosen a path that aligns with deliberate values. Practical strategies for rebellion involve cultivating awareness in daily life. Mindfulness and reflection serve as tools to illuminate hidden impulses and unconscious reactions. By observing your emotions, motivations, and behavioral patterns, you can identify the subtle ways the shadow exerts influence. Consider, for example, moments of jealousy or resentment. Instead of suppressing them or projecting them onto others, examine their origins. What fear, insecurity, or unmet desire fuels these feelings? By naming and understanding them, you prevent them from dictating behavior unconsciously. This practice of conscious acknowledgement is not a cure but a means of reclaiming choice, a quiet, persistent form of rebellion against the deterministic pull of the shadow. Another dimension of rebellion is embracing paradox. Dostoyevsky's characters often inhabit moral gray zones. and he suggests that confronting the shadow requires comfort with contradiction. The underground man recognizes the absurdity of rationalist thinking and societal expectation, yet he continues to act within the constraints of both reason and desire. To break free from the shadow, one must accept that the self is contradictory, that nobility and baseness coexist, and that mastery over impulses does not mean their eradication, but their integration. Paradox becomes a tool, allowing you to navigate life without the illusion of moral purity, relying instead on conscious judgment and reflection. Now, after confronting the darkness, tracing its hidden roots, witnessing its unseen consequences, and rebelling against its silent pull, you stand at the threshold of understanding. It is here, in this quiet, almost unbearable stillness, that the ultimate truth reveals itself, not in a grand proclamation, but in a subtle, shattering clarity. The darkness inside humanity is inseparable from its light. The shadow, the abyss, the chaos you feared, they are not enemies to be vanquished. They are the very conditions that make awareness, morality, compassion, and transcendence possible. To deny them is to remain unconscious, to remain a passenger in the unfolding of your own life. To acknowledge them is to awaken. Dostoyevsky's vision suggests that the human soul is not designed for comfort, nor for moral simplicity. It is designed for tension, for contradiction, for the wrestle between impulses and ideals. Raskolnikov's torment, Alyosha's hope, the underground man's defiance, all these lives illuminate a single truth. The depth of human darkness measures the height of human consciousness. There is no purity without impurity, no courage without fear, no moral insight without the temptation to abandon it. Every act of ethical courage is meaningful only because the alternative, the shadow, is ever present, patient, and persuasive. The ultimate truth is paradoxical. In the darkness lies the possibility of illumination. This realization reframes suffering itself. Viktor Frankl, who understood suffering as the canvas upon which meaning is painted, would recognize Dostoyevsky's insight as a precursor. The human condition is not defined by the absence of darkness, but by the conscious engagement with it. Every moral crisis, every psychological conflict, every moment when the shadow beckons, is an invitation to exercise freedom and shape destiny. Suffering is not a punishment, but a catalyst. It is through this confrontation with inner darkness that the human spirit discovers resilience, creativity, empathy, and the profound capacity for transformation. The abyss is not merely a threat, it is the source of depth, insight, and moral awakening. You begin to see that the darkness you feared in others, the cruelty, deceit, and despair, is mirrored in yourself. But mirrored does not mean permanent. Awareness is a tool of liberation. Conscious acknowledgement of the shadow allows choice. Every thought, every desire, every impulse becomes an opportunity to act with intentionality, to forge meaning rather than drift passively. The rebellion, the act of confronting and integrating the shadow, reveals a profound autonomy. While you cannot eliminate the darkness, you can determine your response to it. You can engage with life fully, aware of its contradictions, and act without the illusions that so often govern human behavior. This is the ultimate power of insight. Philosophically, this understanding dissolves the simplistic binaries that have constrained human thought: good versus evil, right versus wrong, light versus dark. The human soul is a field of tension, and the paradox is its truth. Nietzsche's notion of the tragic hero resonates here. To live fully is to embrace suffering, uncertainty, and contradiction, and through them, to forge strength, creativity, and understanding. Dostoyevsky's literary worlds are microcosms of this insight. Characters are neither wholly virtuous nor entirely wicked, yet through the recognition of their shadows, they achieve profound moral and psychological depth. The final truth is that depth itself, human complexity, is inseparable from the darkness within. Emotionally, this revelation is both humbling and empowering. You recognize your capacity for cruelty, selfishness, and failure, but you also recognize your capacity for love, empathy, and transformation. You understand that life is not a test of moral perfection, but a terrain in which awareness, reflection, and intentional action define meaning. The shadow becomes a teacher rather than a tyrant. Every temptation resisted, every impulse acknowledged and understood, every act of conscious choice becomes an exercise of freedom, an affirmation of the human capacity to navigate existence with integrity. To see this is to awaken to the profound dignity of consciousness itself. And yet, the ultimate realization carries with it a call to action. Knowing the shadow, witnessing its influence, and rebelling against it is not enough if it does not transform life. The revelation demands that thought becomes behavior, reflection becomes habit, and awareness becomes presence in every encounter, every decision, every relationship. You cannot retreat into abstraction or moral theory. The insight must manifest in lived reality. Love, compassion, courage, and honesty are not merely ideals. They are acts of defiance against the unconscious forces that seek to dominate life. To live in accordance with this awareness is to participate fully in the human struggle, embracing both its peril and its possibility. And so, the final vision emerges, a human being who sees the darkness not as an external enemy but as a constant companion, a shadow that defines the contours of the self and the possibilities of consciousness. A human being who acts consciously, not in denial of contradiction, but in harmony with the complexity of existence. A human being who recognizes that every shadow faced, every impulse understood, and every moral choice made is a step toward authentic freedom. This is the culmination of Dostoyevsky's insight. To confront darkness is not to despair. It is to awaken, to reclaim agency, and to embrace the paradox that makes humanity infinitely profound.